Hey everyone, it's Kirsten. Welcome to Season 3 of the Anthropocene. The scene is set. Eucalyptus.
Invasive albino king snakes.
Emerald ash borer and its parasitoids.
The world's largest amphibians.
The invasive species that is humans. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Nicholas. Welcome to the Anthropocene. The scene is set. Surrounded by the deafening drone of the sounds of spring, a biologist wades through the muck of a wetland as it grabs at her boots with the intention of never letting go. Water levels dwindle as the vegetation gets thicker and thicker, a virtual monoculture of aquatic plant life fighting her movements with every step. Slowly, the thicket opens into deeper water, a small puddle compared to the historic expanse of wetland hydrology once present. All life hyper-focused into this dwindling oasis, reducing her study species to a mere shadow of its former density. Conversely, another biologist just a few hundred miles away battles the very same study species as they overwhelm and overtake existing wetland life, causing irreversible changes to sensitive aquatic ecosystems. This dichotomy of conservation focused on a single species within the same country, simultaneously invasive and endangered. And hello, nerds! We're back! Kinda.
We're back!
I mean, we didn't leave, but we also just kind of weren't here.
I mean, Nicholas, you've been less present.
I'm more back, I guess, yeah. Kirsten has kind of been taking the reins and bringing in some guests and whatnot while in my absence. And I feel like you guys have definitely earned some explanations as to why, so I don't just show up and then act like, I haven't really been gone for the last few months. This is kind of the part of the show where we're going to talk about ourselves for a little bit and why we're a little busy sometimes and we don't always get to participate in this, which is something we both definitely enjoy doing. And I love doing this type of stuff. I think that it's a great form of science communication, and it's something that I really enjoy doing completely, for free and just in my spare time. That being said, please follow us on, Buy Me a Coffee, and please send us some money if you want. But you don't have to, because we do genuinely enjoy doing this, but we are full-time scientists and science communicators on the side. So my explanation is I've just been really busy doing science. It's depending on what time of year you're listening to this episode, I guess. Right now, for me, it's summer. And summer is pretty much basically come out of nowhere here in Northern Illinois, which is very typical. It stays very cold for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden it's very hot. Basically, I have been thrown headlong into my research and my daily job, which is, of course, managing the ecosystems around here. So a couple updates on my life. I recently spoke in Pennsylvania at the University of Clarion, and did a bunch of little networking out there with some biologists and got to work with both species of rattlesnake out there and did some really cool stuff. That was kind of the fun stuff. The rest of it has been starting turtle research, which is pretty time consuming on top of managing the native ecosystems around here with the really wet and long spring that we had, followed by the really quick warm up. Everything kind of just shot up at once, which means a lot of plant management. Also, obviously, I manage a greenhouse with native plants that I put into the ecosystem. So all of that it's going great. It's going fantastically. And I'm having a great time. I've just been too busy to do this. And then, I believe Friday we caught our 50th turtle of the survey season this year, which is great because it's only been less than 2 weeks of survey. So that's it's good stuff, good data, bunch of recaptures, bunch of really cool stuff I'm excited for in the future. For those of you who don't know, I do study turtle spatial ecology. So I'm basically looking at the common pond turtles and whatnot, how they're moving and using our established ecosystems, and if they have preferences for stuff like that. What about you, Kirsten? What have you been up to? Because I know, we part of the reason too is when I am free, rarely, you're not, because our schedules just don't line up. So
no, it's been super difficult to be consistent. We would love to be more consistent, but here we are, and we just gotta take what we got.
So I have still been working in the laboratory in Ecuador here on a project on soil invertebrates, and that's really busy, and there's a lot going on with that, and like a couple different kind of projects and papers going on at the same time, and the stuff for some things we're trying to do with uploading stuff to iNaturalist and getting better IDs on them. So that's been cool, but it's a lot. I also have jumped on a paper looking at an invasive ant species here in Quito as well, which, note to self, I have not worked on that. That's tomorrow. And then this last week was really, really fun for me because we had in the museum at the university kind of an open house, because it's a scientific collection that's not usually open to the public, but we had a few boxes of some of the specimens. And I mean, you guys can imagine the incredible kinds of insects and other invertebrates that we have. So, we had people come through and we explained a bit to them, and we had like hundreds of people. So it was really overwhelming, but super cool. And then, for those of you that don't know, I do some content writing and stuff on the side. And I finally got back into doing some science blogging with Untamed Science. So that's been good. But yes, it's all a lot. So we're here when we can, and we're really glad for everyone that's stuck around.
Right, for this exceptionally long season 2. I think this has got to be about almost the third year. We've got to be approaching about the third year of this podcast, right?
I think we were recently year 2, I think. So
maybe that's what it was.
Maybe we need to wrap up season 2.
Whatever. We're just gonna keep it going until we have like some level. Ideally, we're trying to do like, I think 10 episodes a season was kind of the plan, and then give us a break, and because that's what I worked out to be and that's not including snips. I'm talking about like full episodes,
right?
Which we are nowhere near for season 2, and we did not even reach for season 1. So that's probably just not going to be a trend. I think when you originally planned this, that was the kind of idea behind it, is that like, oh yeah, it's no problem to get 10 episodes out. And then it turns out that even in the winter, when we're quote unquote less busy, we're pretty busy. So
yeah,
that's pretty much what we've had in our lifestyle. I think I think this is episode maybe 5 for this season.
Season 2. I'm checking, actually.
I don't know. We haven't done a lot, but I do feel like the quality of the content has improved, as far as like recording methods go, and then also just kind of the intensity, because even though we're busy
this
and not
7. Sorry.
Oh really? Okay, so we're doing pretty good. I think we're tied then for the first season. So we still got a few more things in store. I think Becca wants to come back for another episode, and then we've obviously always got people who have expressed interest in being on the podcast, so we like those episodes because we have to do less work. But kind of what I was saying is I feel like we've definitely put a lot more research and efforts into this. Not that we didn't in the first one, but I feel like we have a better idea of where we need to put our research efforts and to synthesize all of this content for you guys. So yeah, if you skipping through everything, now is the time where we will get into the actual episode. I think this one might be a long one, but sometimes I go through the scripts faster than I intend to or whatnot. So I'll try to slow down the voice this morning.
You sent me a message that said brace yourself. So
yeah, it's like 10 pages of script. Obviously I don't freeform everything for the most part. Some of the stuff that I say is obviously off the cuff, but a lot of it is pre-planned. Sorry if I'm spoiling some sort of idea in people's minds that I just go into these and have no idea. I just memorize all of the citations and whatnot. But I want to make sure that since we are communicating science and things like that, that I don't necessarily say something when I'm not fully paying attention to the words coming out of my mouth, and then in doing so make it unfactual or less correct. So I kind of have a constant guide to remind me of, it's not word for word, but it's fairly verbatim to what I'll be saying throughout the episode. That way I don't have to ad-lib anything when I might not be fully aware of some content. Keeps me on track, especially with my ADHD and whatnot. So with that aside, we will begin. And this episode's really fun. I'm pretty excited for this, obviously, because it's a herpetological episode, and we all know my fascination with that. But this is, I I was going to say the first salamander episode, but that's definitely not true. We had the giant salamander episode, but that's just a snip. This is our first full-length salamander episode, so that's what I'm advertising it as. Today's episode, spoiler alert, we're all used to this. We're doing something a little bit different. Today we're actually covering multiple species, not even taxa, in a single episode. So, like, outside of just multiple species of salamanders, we're covering not just multiple species of animals, but multiple species of both animals and plants. So rather than extensively talk about a single species and their impacts on the environment or their need for conservation, we've actually got a species that is both in need of conservation and invasive, along with the plants that are causing the loss of population within those at-risk species. So first, we do need to get a couple things out of the way.
That's disgusting.
Technically speaking, we're not necessarily talking about the exact same species of animal like I talked about in the introduction there. We're talking about the same genus, but specifically multiple species of tiger salamander. So that's kind of an important distinction to make in this case, because obviously I don't want people thinking that I'm talking about the exact same species of tiger salamander, one being invasive and one being at risk, because that's not necessarily what we're talking about. So furthermore, we're not just discussing the tiger salamanders. We're also discussing the invasive plants like I manage that have caused them to lose habitat within their native ranges and the implications that these invasive species have on these sensitive herpetofauna. So like I said, we're kind of getting like an all-encompassing idea of the problems that are facing the species rather than just focusing on a species and the problems that they are causing in of itself. First, let's get a picture of tiger salamanders because I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. So depending on which species you're looking at, there are different colors and patterns within tiger salamanders, which again is just a common name for multiple species of salamanders that look similar. But for all intents and purposes, we'll be talking about eastern tiger salamanders, which is Ambystoma tigrinum, or barred tiger salamanders, which is Ambystoma mavorium. And in certain cases, we will be talking about the California tiger salamanders, which are Ambystoma californiense, which is I said similar genus at the very beginning, but the Ambystoma genus is huge. It's like all of the mole salamanders, which is a massive amount of salamanders as far as like species diversity and locations go. So I'm kind of colloquially calling them the tiger salamanders, which are a group of salamanders within the genus Ambystoma. So for references, because obviously some of them are subspecies and whatnot. So all of these species that I just mentioned have drastic variability within their patterns and some variability in coloration depending on which localities you're looking at. That being said, tiger salamanders in general are one of the largest species of terrestrial salamander in North America, which grow over a foot or about 30 centimeters in length. So they get fairly large. They're a very heavy-bodied salamander. So I guess picture a blood sausage fully stuffed and ready to burst, and paint some random yellow to brown spots or blotches on the side, or even maybe some stripes. Add some legs and two googly eyes about as far apart as you can get them, and you've got yourself a tiger salamander. So that was the best description I could come up with.
I think I'm gonna have nightmares now.
They're adorable. Check out my Instagram for pictures of adorable, goofy salamanders. Derpiness aside, their chunkiness is in part because of their heavy bodies and large costal grooves that increase surface area to help better diffuse oxygen from the moisture through their skin. There's also a few other suspected purposes of these fat rolls, but for descriptive purposes, you get the point. They got chubby rolls on the side of their bodies.
Adorable.
Yeah, they're really cute. They're super charismatic.
Yeah.
They're they're very goofy in their behaviors too. Whenever I've worked with, at least the species of tiger salamanders I've worked with are very like curious and mobile. They don't necessarily sit still. So like a lot of the times I just don't even bother trying to get pictures of them because they just are constantly moving their big sausage bodies around. So many of the species of tiger salamanders actually have spots rather than stripes like the name would suggest. However, the barred tiger salamander does have the more intense striping patterns, as you might expect. Anecdotally, I've also heard a few local biologists explain the name tiger salamander to people because of their voracious appetites, which seems to align more in people's minds with the tiger prefix, and helps differentiate them from spotted salamanders, which are Ambystoma maculatum, as they also have spots on top of their body. And another good differentiation between spotted salamanders and tiger salamanders is that the spots on tiger salamanders cover the majority of their body, whereas spotted salamanders typically have them confined to the top and legs. Because spotted salamanders will have yellow to orange spots, but sometimes they're just yellow. And if you're unfamiliar with salamanders, it's very easy to confuse the two species. So that's one distinct difference if you're within the range of where they overlap.
You're telling me that the spotted salamanders are the less spotty ones.
Yep. And the
Okay.
tiger salamanders are the ones that don't usually have stripes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That
But the
makes perfect
subspecies
sense.
has stripes. So
Right.
So yeah, I think a lot of biologists have kind of taken to like being like, well, this is difficult to explain without going through that whole mess and just saying like they're called tiger salamanders because of their voracious appetite.
Okay. Hungry boy.
And of course, there's probably some amphibian enthusiasts listening. And if you are, then yes, I am fully aware that I'm over-explaining species of salamanders that are probably incredibly easy to differentiate in your mind. But for the listeners who may not have the luxury of interacting with many or any species of salamanders, this is kind of for them. Because remember, this podcast is for everybody. So we present information at all levels.
I have no idea. So I have seen a handful of salamanders maybe in my life. So
Right, and for our Australian listeners, sorry. Out of luck.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
Now that we have a very brief introduction into the fauna of this episode, we need to start discussing the invasive flora that are detrimental to their native habitat. So right now we're going to be diving into the tiger salamanders that I work with predominantly and what problems I'm facing within their habitat. So as a restoration ecologist who spends extensive amount of time within various wetlands habitat, I would argue that some of the most aggressive invasive species that I have ever encountered are present within much of the tiger salamander's habitat. And don't worry, I have data to support it. Obviously, I think we say that a lot. Like, this is the most aggressive invasive species ever or whatnot. But, like, usually, anecdotally, I'll say something on the side, like, except for maybe, like, Phragmites or reed canary grass, which we haven't talked about in depth at all. This episode, we're actually going to be talking about that. Today, we're going to be discussing 3 species of invasive plants as from my own personal experience. These are probably the most prominent wetland invasive species that overlap through much of the tiger salamander's habitat. We're talking about the eastern tiger salamander right now, Ambystoma tigrinum, by the way. So first, we have the ever-present cattails, which may surprise many to learn of their invasive status, but yes, they are. Secondly, we have 2 species of semi-aquatic invasive grasses, which are Phalaris arundinaceae, or reed canary grass, which I'll probably refer to as RCG. And finally, we have the global invasive species that is probably the most detrimental to sensitive wetland ecosystems on a global scale, which is Phragmites australis, aka giant reed. And I will probably just refer to that as Phragmites or Phrag, Phrag.
okay.
So,
Can I pause you for a sec?
nope.
Did we say what? No. Did we say what the range of the eastern salamander or eastern
The eastern tiger salamander is?
Yeah.
It's like the eastern United States, more or less. And then there's like
Right.
subspecies and whatnot. If you get into like the middle eastern United States to out west, you've got the barred tiger salamanders. And then when you get like obviously out towards the west side, you've got like California tiger salamanders. If we're breaking down just those 3 species and subspecies particularly.
Right. Okay. Just to have the context for the.
Yeah, and also like the tiger like I'm talking specifically in the U.S. Like they go up into Canada and then down into Mexico. So just for reference.
Okay. Cool.
Phragmites is probably going to be our main focus for today, and I think it definitely has the most direct impacts on habitats that are shared by the tiger salamanders. It's really important to know that there are narrow-leaved, which is Typha angustifolia, and broadleaf cattails, which and the broadleaf are Typha latifolia. Both are native to the U.S., but originally they were separate from one another before being introduced into overlapping habitats and eventually hybridizing into a more aggressive version that overtakes wetlands, but isn't necessarily proven to be excessively detrimental. The main problem we're worrying about here is them suffocating out less aggressive and higher quality native plants that provide more diverse habitat and food. That being said, they do fill a niche because they are both native, but that hybridization status does make them more aggressive. We'll actually talk about this more, that process with the tiger salamanders later on. But I know some people are going to be like, well, the cattails are good, blah, blah, blah. I know. I'm aware. I'm aware that they're good for herpetological stuff and whatnot. But as a floristic level, their hybridization between the native and non-native species does make it more aggressive and suffocating out some of the good quality native plants that would be better for example, pollinators and things like that. And obviously the native floristic quality as well.
So they're like good in moderation, just like
right. Yeah, it's just yeah. It's and we won't be focusing on that one too much because we're going to be focusing on the ones that are genuinely detrimental to the habitat. But cattails are going to be on the lower end of that scale. But I figured to bring them up just because it's something that I do see and it is something that I do manage. So reed canary grass is more of a terrestrial version of the same problem with cattails, but more serious. They often grow incredibly densely alongside wet areas, and they suffocate out more beneficial native plants. I mean, it'll be solid monoculture, reed canary grass, basically everywhere. You won't see like any other plants. It's exceptionally difficult for them to grow through it because it just grows so densely and so readily. So reed canary grass is definitely more problematic than cattails. So Phragmites, like I said from the beginning, is going to be our primary focus because this is the one that grows within the wetter areas of these wetland habitats and will have more direct effects on the tiger salamander populations. So if we're discussing Phragmites, imagine a massive grass with multiple blades alternating up these incredibly tall stems. Stems can be about as thick as your pinky finger around, and I've often heard people refer to this grass as bamboo because of the similar growing structure to massive grass stalks growing out with some degree of separation. So they kind of have that broken grass, like bamboo style, where it's got segments.
Yeah, okay.
And it grows super tall, growing 13 plus feet. This grass still grows in the same densities as other mat grasses. So it's basically just like lawn grass on steroids. And yeah, it says 13 plus feet, but I've easily seen it growing closer to 15 to 20 feet. It depends on the habitat that it's growing in and whatnot. But because it's so aggressive and invasive, it just absolutely suffocates out everything below it. So reed canary grass is a shorter grass, getting only 3 to 4 feet regularly, with some variation, again, depending on habitat. But RCG has a tendency to nod over a bit and entangle and grow between itself, whereas Phragmites kind of just stands up straight and is just so tall it kind of waves back and forth. You'll see it in basically any movie that's anywhere near a wetland or a golf course or roadside ditch that's wet or anything like that. It's got very fluffy tops, and it usually blows in the wind. What is it like in its native habitat? Well, frag is theorized to have come from somewhere in the Middle East. However, research done by Plutt et al. In 2011 looked at the molecular genetic structure of various populations of Phragmites and determined it to have likely originated from somewhere in Europe, perhaps around the UK. Many people get fairly confused when they hear the species epithet and assume that the species is native to Australia, Phragmites australis. But Australis literally just means southern. And anecdotally, Australia is called Australia when it was discovered because everybody figured that there's no way there could be a landmass more south than this.
Well, you're wrong.
So
Right.
It's like the southernmost land is basically what Australia means. So yeah, that's where it gets. It's not from Australia though. It is a problem in Australia, but so RCG, native to Europe and Asia, and I guess parts of North America. However, it is likely that the non-native species have hybridized with any native species and have become more aggressive. So you don't even have to worry about differentiating between native and non-native species. According to Laverne and Malofsky in 2007, introduced populations have higher genetic diversity and phenotypic variation than within the native range. So there you go. It basically is saying that once they hybridize, it doesn't matter if there's native varieties around because it's just going to hybridize with that and cause exacerbated problems, which is unfortunate. So this phenotypic variation in genetic diversity is likely increased due to the ongoing hybridization, which is the fancy way of saying once they hybridize, they get stronger and then are more detrimental to the ecosystems and no longer beneficial. Increased reproductivity and hybridization of both species have allowed for greater success in their introduced habitat than within their native ranges. So they're a lot more successful than they are doing when they're in their native ranges. Picture it this way. If you have a native species of plant that has adapted to live and thrive in an environment, and you hybridize it with a species that is not limited by the same environmental or biological factors as the native variety, then you have potential to produce a far more aggressive and successful hybrid than either of those species individually. That's the most simplistic way that I guess I can put it. And I kind of want to expand on that too. You also lose native genetic diversity and overall species presence through the introduction of these hybrids. As we all know, not all hybrids are successful, and I'm sure many of you listening are thinking of fauna hybrids that become sterile. If you're discussing plants, then the most likely reason the plants become sterile is due to polyploidy, which is more or less the pairing of multiple sets of chromosomes. If chromosomes are mismatched in this way, they cannot effectively produce gametes, which are the egg and sperm cells. And because of this inequity in the reproductive cells, certain hybrids cannot reproduce. However, many plants, and for that matter, animals, do retain enough genetic compatibility after hybridization to produce viable offspring, as we will find is a massive problem, not only with these grasses, but with the salamanders themselves. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I think a lot of times when people are thinking about hybrids, they're probably thinking of like ligers, like the tiger and lion hybrids, or the zonkies.
Or mules.
And whatnot. Yeah, or mules, which are all sterile. They can't reproduce that way. So
there's also a thing too sometimes in fauna where when you get hybridization and the next generation does really, really good, and then the one after that like does really poorly, and it's called, oh crap, it's hybrid something. I'll find the word.
Don't remember off the top of my head. Essentially, you've got these super hyper aggressive hybrid species that are not only lowering the presence of the native varieties they are hybridizing with by occupying that niche, but they are also becoming so successful that they are expanding into other niches in areas with completely different hydrology and soil structures. And again, this will be made more clear with the salamanders. I kind of explain all of the problems more in detail at the end in the summary. The question, of course, is why is it so successful, other than the reasons I just said? But on top of the obviously problematic hybridization, Phragmites is insanely good at both reproduction and outcompeting other plants, which is typical amongst invasives. We've seen this with kudzu and all of the other invasive plants that we've talked about. That's why they're successful. If we're discussing competition, you really only need to scale up Kentucky bluegrass from our previous episode to understand how difficult these species make it for light to reach plants below, as well as taking up nutrients and in general occupying soil space. You basically, instead of bunch grasses, you've got a giant mat grass. You've got a giant lawn grass that is just suffocating out everything else. Think of the basic principle of forest gap phase dynamics. So a large canopy grows at the top of a forest, preventing as much light from reaching the levels below. If a tree falls, then a gap is made, creating space and light that will allow for the next successor to occupy it. Scale this principle down to an herbaceous level. These taller grasses are essentially giant trees occupying the entire canopy and midstory, as well as the soil nutrients. So when a disturbance is made, they're the primary successors able to capitalize and continuously spread and grow in intensity. So it's not like in a forest where when a tree falls, then like there's many other species that can grow out. They've basically monopolized both the canopy, the midstory, and the understory at a smaller level, and the seed bank. So everything is growing much more quickly and nothing has a chance to outcompete it. Primary successors.
Primary sexers.
Primary sexers present.
What does that mean?
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It
Gets the people going.
Primary successors are essentially the species that first colonize an area after a disturbance. This is generally the plants that are the fastest growing, quickest to reproduce, most tolerant of disturbance, and have diverse growing conditions. By definition, this is essentially referring to invasive species, as they are generally successful for all of those reasons. Again, though, these are technically secondary successors, as we broke down in a previous episode, but the terminology is often not used correctly, because primary successors are the first organisms to colonize something, Whereas if there's already something there and something happens after a disturbance, then those are technically the secondary successors because something was already there previously. But for the intents and purposes of this discussion, it's the primary successors that take place after a disturbance, which is kind of, it's difficult to explain. It's a weird concept. I think that the terminology could utilize some improvement. But these are more or less the first successors present because they are quick to grow and reproduce and establish. That's all you need to take away from that. Grasses reproduce by different means. It's not the same as like flowers and things like that. Now, they do reproduce in some similar ways as flowers. Grasses do flower, in fact, but they also have other things that make them more advantageous for reproduction. So the most prominent is going to be through seed and through rhizome expansion. While not all grasses do produce rhizomes, wetland grasses are particularly good at it. This can be attributed to the fact that it is generally in a plant's best interest to have a good, strong root system that covers a lot of surface area and depth to accommodate the hydrologic conditions that they're going to be growing in a wetland. From this strong rhizomatous root system, which are often called runners colloquially, mat grasses will put up shoots of new growth, which they then reproduce through with seed heads. So you've basically got them reproducing through seed and reproducing underground through these rhizomes, which are just putting up more clones of the original plants and obviously getting more genetic diversity by actually reproducing through seed.
Yeah, it's kind of like having just like this big long tube and then little babies start shooting up like
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you've ever watched the episode of Kids Next Door where there's a giant radish and it shoots underground, there's giant roots and it produces other giant radishes from that. For the one person who gets that reference, thank you. So anyway, these clusters of reproductive potential are called inflorescence in grasses. When I'm talking about like the flowering portion of the grasses, it's called inflorescence. The inflorescence of Phragmites is a bit fluffier, while RCG actually gets its name from the golden inflorescence it gets upon maturity. So reed canary grass, like a canary bird, it's usually pretty yellow. And this is kind of like the easiest way to identify the invasive species from other invasive species is that inflorescence. Much like other grasses that outcompete our native grasses, Phragmites and RCG have extensive growing periods that make them more intensive to manage, meaning that they grow for longer periods than our native grasses. Additionally, Phragmites isn't managed very effectively until it reaches maturity, which greatly reduces the time between management and seeding out, meaning that there's so much to manage, but you only have a very finite amount of time to do it, and the rest of the time is just growing and reestablishing other places. So, very difficult to manage. Where is Phragmites currently invasive? Well, Phragmites, like I said at the beginning, is currently considered a global invasive species. It is established in ecosystems throughout the world and continues to be one of the most prominent invasive wetland species. I mean, legitimately prominent. If you watch movies or TV shows and they're filmed near wetlands or ponds, many times you will see Phragmites waving around in the background. That's the type of nerd I am. I'll be sitting there watching movies and I'll be like, God damn it, the Phragmites in the background of this nature documentary is just ruining the whole vibe for me because it's not supposed to be there. And then they got these like, oh, it's a beautiful scene of the sunrise with the Phragmites in the foreground. Nope, makes me upset.
I feel like I just see that meme, you like, well, maybe there won't be a second date, but at least now they know that Phragmites is a cosmopolitan invasive species.
I've not seen that meme, but yeah, it fits me pretty well.
I just saw one. It was like, maybe there won't be a second date, but at least they know that cats and dogs are like,
yeah, okay,
problems around the world. And then
I'm a fan.
Yeah, I think I saw it in Spanish. Maybe it's not English yet.
Oh, maybe. So, why or how was it introduced? For reed canary grass, it was actually introduced for grazing for cattle and erosion control. Obviously, a lot of these invasive plants are introduced for erosion control because they have really, thick root systems, and people think that's going to hold everything together after we've tilled away the native plant systems that had much stronger root systems because, knowledge. But it was also used for grazing for cattle was a big one because it would grow in the wetter places that the native grasses wouldn't necessarily grow. So when they were draining wetlands, it would grow in the places where, our native grasses wouldn't necessarily grow, and there was nothing for the cattle to graze on. Frag also introduced for erosion control along roadways and stuff like that, which does a great job of it. Also does a great job at screwing up those ecosystems entirely. And cattails, I actually didn't look into it. We're not really talking about cattails, so, there. What are the issues? homogenization, water and nutrient absorption, and water flow. I think that's pretty standard for all plants. I'll break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But the largest impacts caused by Phragmites and aided by cattails and RCG, so it's kind of a trifecta, which is why I've included all of them, have to do with the water flow. It's not necessarily just the plants being suffocated out, because that's not necessarily going to affect the salamanders as much. Obviously, there's some niche like overlap, but it's not necessarily going to be something that is directly impacting the salamanders. There's a much more direct impact that is causing problems. Phragmites, with its ridiculous density and intermixed rhizomatous root systems, can, in extreme situations, actually stop the flow of water entirely. As water flow is reduced and hydrologic movements are displaced, Phragmites can slowly suffocate out water bodies as the water is reduced within the positive feedback loop. So basically, you've got Phragmites growing in an extreme density in an area. Its rhizomes are stopping the flow of water moving through that area. Therefore, the water is less prominent and shrinks. And then as it shrinks, the Phragmites can grow in those areas with less water. So it just slowly encroaches upon this wetland ecosystem and makes the actual depth of the water shallower and shallower, decreasing the habitat in a positive feedback loop with negative results.
Right, and so it can still live when it's pretty dry. It's not like it sucks it all
Oh
up
yeah,
and then kills
yeah.
itself.
It's
Okay.
surprisingly good. It definitely is preferential to wetter conditions, but it is surprisingly good at living through like droughts and things like that.
Right, okay. And I guess the hybrid would probably even be even better at that, right? 'Cause it
Yep,
has
because
both.
frag does hybridize with the native Phragmites species, and yeah. So all of these factors make for an incredibly real threat to the wetland hydrology that tiger salamanders require for breeding purposes. So for those of you unaware, I'm about to explain the breeding process of salamanders, or at least ambystomid salamanders. And tiger salamanders often are basically using fishless bodies of water to breed and deposit egg masses to develop their young. They have a fully aquatic gilled larval stage, as the vast majority of amphibians do, like tadpoles. So, as the water is reduced with these ephemeral or temporary bodies of water more quickly or entirely, the salamanders cannot effectively breed, which slowly suffocates out their populations. Let's quickly cover management before we get to the end of part 1 of this 2-part paper. So, aquatic management is very difficult, to say the least, especially semi-aquatic or emergent management, meaning the plants that are marginal plants, meaning they grow in or out of or near the water. And why? Well, that is a great question, Kirsten's inner monologue. What's one factor that makes an aquatic ecosystem more difficult to manage than a terrestrial one?
You get wet.
Exactly. Water. It's simple as that. Water makes cultural practices like burning very difficult to do effectively. Even if you're successful in burning off the top of the plants, the root systems are often preserved from the heat by the water and the residual moisture that remains in the soil. Mechanical practices are very messy, and there's obvious limitations presented from the water and unstable soil. You can just tear up the soil and the hydrology by trying to manage them. Finally, chemicals are chemicals. Application must be done using hyperspecific formulations and applied in a manner that doesn't integrate negatively into the hydrology of the ecosystem. So if you're applying chemicals to an area and it's water soluble and there's water there, then that's not good. And a lot of chemicals don't adapt well to water, meaning that you have to use very specific chemicals that are proven not to have drastic effects on the ecosystems. And even then, if you apply them incorrectly, you can have detrimental effects to the ecosystem. So basically what I'm saying is, for wetland management, it's very difficult for cultural, biological, mechanical, and chemical management. All of it is made more difficult by the presence of water.
You're saying I can't just like dump like a gallon of gasoline into the water system and light it all on fire?
Well, they tried to do that apparently a few miles from me, where a gas
God.
station was under construction and a gas tank burst or whatever, leaking 7,500 gallons into the neighboring wetland, and then the EPA was out there the next day, and it's basically a dead wetland now. So, which is like right within the range of the tiger salamander's habitat. So, yeah, don't do that. Safe to say, these management strategies are abysmally time-consuming and labor-intensive. Trust me, these are like some of the most dreaded types of management strategies just because of the conditions that you're working with. This means that many wetland areas that are already overtaken by these invasive plants are just left to continue this cycle of monoculture growth and reductions in biodiversity. Like, seriously, if you go out to your local wetlands or restored preserves, many times the surrounding woodlands, prairies, and other terrestrial ecosystems can be floristically restored to an incredible degree. Yet when you go to the wetland areas, you've got a vast expanse of invasive monoculture growth. It's something I see all the time out here. It's just very difficult to manage these, and it's just sometimes not done or not even considered. So for the majority of people, this either goes unnoticed or is so commonplace that it isn't even something that enters their mind as a potential problem. However, for freakishly hyper-focused nerds like myself, this is an abysmal portrayal of just how difficult wetland restoration can be. I could sit here all day and talk about like the horror stories that I've done through wetland restoration and just how difficult it is, because you're constantly considering the hydrology and everything that's in there, and it's difficult. You're walking through like mud and these super super tall plants that are suffocating you and smacking you in the face, breeding grounds for mosquitoes because they create these shallow water pools, and then abysmally hot. So all of the conditions make it very difficult, and it's not necessarily effective to do a lot of the management strategies. So you just see a lot of restoration companies and organizations just ignoring the restoration in these ecosystems entirely. So is it impossible? No, because I'm still obviously doing it. Have I seen all of these species successfully removed from areas before? Yes, it does actually happen regularly. But I often wonder what the impacts of these intensive and chemically driven management strategies have on sensitive herpetological populations that are, one, having their floristic habitat, albeit an invasive one, completely removed, and two, having the direct and indirect effects of chemicals and management on top of the existing stressors of the invasives themselves. So basically, when it is done, it's done usually in a super intense way that it's like, well, did you just destroy that already at risk ecosystem just to try and get this floristic population established, and then not necessarily take into account the floristic or the faunal aspects of it, the animals? So that's kind of something.
I guess what you're really hoping for is to try to, I mean, maybe you have to like have this negative impact and then hope that at restoring the native fauna that you get like a repopulation there. But the problem is if you don't have a healthy population close enough nearby, then you're not going to get any repopulation there. So that's tricky. That's a tricky one.
And there's no way to quantify it. I think that's the thing, is there's no way to say like, well, what's the health of this ecosystem prior to management? If, you know, I mean, I guess you can do like fauna surveys and whatnot, but there's not enough research out there right now to show like, what is the, I guess, reflex capabilities of these populations? Are they going to be able to bounce back after this disturbance? Because that is what you're doing. You're creating a massive disturbance. And there's definitely there's a multi-year return for native plants to establish. So if you completely manage an area and wipe out all of the cattails, phragmites, and reed canary grass, there's literally no habitat left for those species. So you're taking what little niche they have, even though it's an invasive niche, you know, they're there. So it's like, what do you do? And that's like a constant battle. That's something that I think like restoration ecologists and biologists kind of like butt heads on, is a lot of times is just take into account the floristic side of things, and people don't necessarily think about the applications of fauna. And this is specifically in Illinois, because when I went to Pennsylvania, they very, very intensely taken into account the management strategies in regards to their fauna, which was super refreshing to see. And their management strategies were very well thought out. They took into account both ecologists, botanists, and biologists that studied everything, which is the way it should be done. And their management strategies are more or less very effective. I don't necessarily know that they do a lot of Phragmites management and whatnot, but their forestry management is top notch out there. So good job on you, Pennsylvania.
Gold star.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning, to a conclusion of this part of the episode, that tiger salamanders of multiple species are not just under the stressors of invasive species, but also significant habitat loss, climate change, and disease. So they're not just facing the problems caused by these species that I'm talking about. There's a lot of other environmental stressors that are reducing their populations. So take that into account when management is being done. However, after the break, We'll be talking about how these amphibians that we've hopefully grown to love and develop concern for because of their habitat fragility in part 1 and their little charismatic sausage lives, and how they're actually causing their own detrimental effects to ecosystems that they've been introduced to in part 2. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Hello again.
Welcome back.
Hope you got a snack and some juice. I'm just kidding.
Right. Hopefully you all just listened to part 1, or if you are not listening to them back to back and you've taken a break between parts, well, we're happy you've returned. And if you never did return, then screw you, you bastards. But you'll never hear that because,
You're not here.
you're not here.
Well, just know that us and the people that are listening are talking about you behind your back.
Right, exactly. Even though you'll never hear these insults, just like we'll never get a sponsor to put up with my stupid jokes.
Or get rid of Phragmites.
Right.
Slow crystalline tear.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're just returning or you've taken a little break, brief refresher. In part 1, we discussed tiger salamanders within their native habitats, predominantly the eastern tiger salamanders, as those are my study species specifically, and where most of my information has been pulled from. Specifically, we focused on the invasive plant species that are having impacts on their fragmented populations. One thing that I did want to be clear on is that because we're talking about different species of tiger salamanders across a really large expanse of North America, there's different listings depending on where you're at and which species you're talking about. So eastern tiger salamanders, for example, are doing pretty, this is very heavy air quotations I'm doing right now, but all right, throughout much of their native range, which is excluding Canada, where much of the populations have been extirpated due to habitat loss. But through the U.S. populations of eastern tiger salamanders, they're doing okay. Furthermore, the California tiger salamander is listed as an endangered species, partly because of other tiger salamanders. And also, barred tiger salamanders were classified as a subspecies of tiger salamander, but I'm fairly certain were elevated to full species status. However, I'm sure people will correct me when I'm wrong about that, so why bother even doing the research?
Taxonomy sucks.
Oh, yeah,
It changes
it's
all
just so
the
annoying.
time. Oh, man.
But I made the distinction, so whatever, suck it. I put in the effort.
My best.
Regardless, they also have varying degrees of status from least concern to endangered, depending on where you're at throughout their range. So this is where I'm going to be switching gears from the last part. Obviously, we went floristic in the first part. However, now we'll be focusing on the salamanders themselves as invasive species, which I'm sure many of you who were listening to this episode expecting to hear all about salamanders are cheering for. For those of you who like plants, sorry, they're kind of done for the episode. But stay around, because maybe I'll put some in there. You don't know. I don't know.
You can like both.
Yeah, you can like both.
I mean,
It's important to
biology's
know both. That's kind of the whole point of this episode, is that you need to know both.
Biology's a spectrum, okay?
Yeah. Essentially, what I'm saying right off the bat is yes, we are acknowledging that the tiger salamanders at risk from invasive tiger salamander species are also experiencing invasive flora, climate change, and other anthropocentric factors that are contributing to their decline. Just so it's out there, I'm aware there's other stuff. But we are focusing specifically now on the invasive tiger salamanders as our primary focal point for this part of the episode. We've discussed the plants, albeit about a different about a different species in the beginning, but now we're focusing on the invasive tiger salamanders. So there.
Full disclosure.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Ready to rock.
So to be even more clear, I'm basically covering our ass for when somebody brings up the fact that other factors are also contributing to their decline. And if you're really upset I didn't cover something, feel free to @ me. My Instagram handle is Kirsten O. Joseph. Send angry messages and pictures of toilets.
Why toilets?
Oh, if they want to say something to me, if they're really angry, that's my Instagram. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Ryan M.E. Johnson Jr. and Fitzpatrick B.M. in 2009 kind of really quantifies the impacts that invasive tiger salamanders have on the ecosystems that they're introduced to. You know, I'm actually really curious that we're talking about this. I wonder if, conservation efforts are affected by people's perceptions of animals. I mean, like, obviously they are in like some degree. Like, the general public is going to support the eradication of animals they don't find charismatic or desirable, like cats, for example. People love them, and no matter how much damage they cause, people are going to be on their side. So in that regard, I think it's like pretty fair to say. But what about from the standpoint of the biologists that are just working here in these populations? They're working with a species of tiger salamander. I just wonder if that makes it harder for them to hate the invasive species. You know what I mean? Like, they're working to conserve a species of tiger salamander from another species of tiger salamander. Does that make it like do you think that there's some like internal struggle in their brains?
Probably. Like, I mean, we need to like try to remain, I mean, I say try, like a big try, capital letters, to remain like objective in these kind of things, because yeah, like we've talked about, I mean, in the charismatic megafauna episode, like that was definitely a limitation to control. I'm not going to say too much in case you haven't watched it, listen to it, go back to that. But for sure there's a bit of a conflict with control. Like, I mean, think about in like Florida, where there's like, I don't know, some tree frogs that are invasive. Like, could you imagine being the person going out and eradicating them? Like, it's gotta suck a little bit, especially if you're a herp lover. But
Yeah,
we have to
I mean,
like, kind of make the sacrifices to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this, how I've done the invasive removal of Burmese pythons and tegus and stuff, and had to do their euthanization and whatnot and destroy them, and that's horrible. I mean, it's like it's a weird emotion. It's one of those situations where like emotions don't necessarily function in like a normal thing. It kind of just feels surreal because like everybody's conflicting about what's happening, but we know that it needs to be done. So it's I think this is just something I kind of wanted to bring up just to like understand that like, and I think I actually kind of want to talk about this maybe at the end, so I'll circle back to it. But yeah, like,
okay,
it's difficult. It's like a difficult mindset to be in, so, especially if you're just a nature lover in general.
Yeah, like even as we like always like get real mad about feral cats, because we do. I mean, I'm a cat lover. It's not like if I were to do cat control, which I would definitely participate in, that I'm gonna be like enjoying destroying these animals. Like, I'm not some like sick fuck. Like, I'm just a biologist that knows that it's, worth it. So,
and to all the sick fucks out there who are just super stoked about being able to like go shoot animals because they're invasive, like, that's not what we're trying to push here. You know what? We'll cycle back to this at the end. We're getting a little off track.
Yes. Sorry.
So back to the little sausages. What exactly are these tiger salamanders doing to the native species that occupy these habitats? Well, a lot. Now, typically, we think of tiger salamanders as large, dopey sausages, like I just mentioned, that spend most of their time underground doing very little. That might make it a little difficult to imagine them as aggressive predators, but in fact, tiger salamanders are incredibly voracious animals. Their presence in the ecosystem reduces populations of native newts, frogs, and salamanders, both through competition and predation. Tiger salamanders have absolutely no problem cannibalizing different species of tiger salamanders. In fact, tiger salamanders have no difficulty cannibalizing their own species. This is so commonplace and frequent that some populations of tiger salamanders have actually evolved phenotypic or physical adaptations that allow them to better consume other tiger salamanders of the same species within the same populations. There are literally populations of specialized cannibalistic tiger salamanders, which is fucking nuts. They have like giant heads. It's more so the larval forms, but their heads are increased in size, and their vomerine teeth are basically like, they're not real teeth, but they're these like spiked protrusions that come out of the gums of salamanders and stuff like that. Theirs are more pronounced in the cannibalistic populations so that they can better grip other species or the same species of larval salamanders. It's pretty ridiculous. It's super cool.
Wild.
I encourage you to look it up. They're kind of monstrous looking. So obviously you've got the direct competition and predation that takes primarily within the reproductive pools, right? But you've also got another problem that these invasive tiger salamanders are bringing to the table in terms of reducing native tiger salamander populations. Any guesses on what that might be?
Eating the eggs.
What?
Oh, wait, can you ask one more time?
Eat.
Sorry. I was still picturing. Okay, no, sorry, like full disclosure. I was like picturing the little tadpole guys and like
Mhm.
thinking about how they were like a real life Pac-Man with like these weird teeth. And
Oh,
like,
they're pretty ridiculous. Like they got giant heads.
my brain just shut off.
All right,
I'm so
we'll try
sorry.
that again.
Okay.
So obviously you've got the direct competition and predation that takes place primarily within the reproductive pools, but you've
Okay.
also got another problem that these invasive tiger salamanders are bringing to the tables in terms of reducing the native salamander populations. Would you like to guess what that might be?
Disease?
No.
No.
Well,
Okay, so
perhaps, but that's not what I'm talking about.
okay, so other than eating them directly or
Yes.
like out competing them for food.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, other than that,
I've brought it up before in this very same episode.
the plants.
No.
No. I no.
It has
I
to
don't
do
have
with
it.
genetic fecundity.
Oh, hybridization.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep, hybridization. So you've
Of
got the
course.
loss of biodiversity through mixed genetics. So
There
with
we go.
hybridization, you're definitely getting the loss of the native species because you're creating hybrids, which are, for reasons I don't feel the need to explain, not the original species. However, these hybrids are also causing negative impacts on the local salamander populations as well, directly. According to the previously mentioned study, the presence of these hybrid larvae is reducing the size of the native larvae as well as their overall survival. On top of that, their time to metamorphosis was extended, meaning that the native ones took longer to reach adulthood, which is going to be detrimental to their populations, because the quicker you can reach adulthood, the more effective your life cycle is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So to simplify, the hybrid larvae are likely outcompeting the native larvae for food and niche availability, which is making it difficult for them to survive, meaning the native species are having more trouble surviving and reaching that adulthood.
Okay.
And the ones that do survive have reduced size and take longer to metamorphosize, like I had previously mentioned. And if you're on the time limit of losing your gills before the breeding pools dry up, obviously also in California where water is a significant problem, you could see some serious population decline just from those effects alone. I mentioned in part 1 that we'd talk about hybridization. A lot of times when the general person is thinking of a hybrid, like I said, they're thinking of an intentionally crossbred animal like a liger or a zonkey or a mule, like you had mentioned. In many cases of hybridization, you get hybrid sterility. This is, in very super basic terms, is the inability to reproduce that's created by unfit gene combinations. The offspring aren't as put together, genetically speaking, as either of the parent species. That's what happens a lot of times, especially in animals. However, in certain cases, although two species are separated genetically, the hybrid offspring may retain traits from parents that actually improve genetic fitness. This means that the offspring of the hybrids have qualities that make them more effective at survival or reproduction. So, in summary, essentially what we're looking at here is an introduced population of similar species that are able to outcompete the native species within that region. So these introduced species are better at reproducing than the original species. These hybrids are now more effective at surviving than the originals, on top of outcompeting them and reducing their genetics. I think many times we've covered invasive species that are incredibly successful due to the fact that they are introduced into completely new ecosystems that don't have anything similar. I guess I'm kind of thinking of our episode on maybe kudzu, or perhaps the episode on albino king snakes in the Canary Islands. Check both of those out. Those species are disgustingly successful because they've got adaptations from completely different ecosystems that allow them to be far more effective than the native species within an area, because they occupy different niches or multiple niches. They're just completely alien species to these environments, and they happen to have adaptations that make them really successful and nothing's bringing them down. However, with the case of these invasive tiger salamanders, something similar can be said, I guess, about their more successful adaptations, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not really that different from the species they're having the largest effect on. I guess my ramblings can kind of be summarized in the fact that these tiger salamanders are occupying exceptionally similar niches in this case, with just slightly advantageous traits. This encompassing niche occupation is exceptionally detrimental to the native tiger salamanders because they just don't have any room to compete. Is that making sense? Or should I try harder?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, just to make sure that I caught it and maybe everybody else did, essentially they're coming in and the hybrids are doing better than the native ones, and then they're outcompeting them. It's, yeah, which is not always the case, which is what you were talking about as well. Like, I
Right.
know in Alberta in Canada, there's the West Slope cutthroat trout, and then there's the rainbow trout, and they're hybridizing, and their hybrids are doing really poorly, and then so
Right.
they're dying off.
Right.
So, but in this case, they're hybridizing. The hybrids are doing great, which is okay, but then you're totally losing the native species. So,
Right. And
yeah.
so you've got these species too. I think that the part that I'm trying to impress here is that these species are very similar, both
Yeah.
in habitat and behavior. So there's only slight differences between the eastern tiger salamander and the California tiger salamander overall, but those slight advantageous traits in the eastern tiger salamander and their hybrids are enough because they're occupying a holistic niche together.
Yeah.
Every little aspect of their niche is being shared by these invasive species rather than a completely random invasive species that just comes in out of nowhere and has nothing related. They're exceptionally similar, but have just enough advantageous traits that it kind of makes them more problematic, because in other invasive species, sometimes native plants can have a little bit of a foothold because they're so different that they don't occupy the entire niche. So in certain areas, they're able to thrive and survive. But in this case, their entire niche is kind of being occupied on multiple levels. And then you've also got the more advantageous hybrids that are resulting. So this one is pretty serious to a population of salamanders that's already under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, you're not having. Yeah, there's not like a little layer of separation where there's still enough room for the native species, even if the non-native ones are
Right. There's
are
just
taking over a
nowhere
lot
for
of the
them to
other
go.
stuff. Yeah. I mean, controversial, but you could argue that the hybrids might be like the only way for the species to survive climate change. I don't know if you're going there at some point, but
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of touched on this in the Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders, where many of them, the Japanese ones, are under exceptional pressure, and they're hybridizing with the Chinese salamanders, so like they're being reduced in that way. And like some people will argue, it's like, well, they're reproducing readily and they're doing better that way, but that's a different species.
yeah,
It's not the same. It's a hybrid,
yeah,
so it is different. So you're still, the original species is still being reduced. These hybrids are not going to necessarily perform the same ecosystem services as the original species that were there. So I guess kind of with that, I guess that includes this two-parter episode of conservation and removal of the same type of animal, the tiger salamanders. And I've really only just scratched the surface of this topic, but I think our linked resources can offer more information for anybody who wants to dive deeper into this dichotomy between these tiger salamanders that are both at risk and imperiled and causing problems in different parts of their range. So before we end the episode, I do kind of want to circle back to what we were talking a little bit before. I know that with our growing audience and the fact that episodes are not chronological or anything like that, people can easily pick and choose which episodes they want to listen to. And many times that probably won't include our introductory episode because who wants to hear that? I am aware that we talk about invasive species in virtually every episode, and we just want to reiterate something very important. We're not trying to vilify these organisms. They're quite literally just surviving and thriving in environments that they didn't get to on their own. Basically, what I'm saying is we've got all the responsibilities on our shoulders as humans, and I feel like it's very easy to forget that. Especially if you're someone putting in an incredible amount of time and effort into removing these species or battling to conserve the species affected by invasive species or a science communicator, etc. But we're not going to advocate anger or hatred for any life on this planet. That's not why we're here. We're not trying to displace anger for, like violent acts to native species and just make it okay to have violent acts towards non-native species. It's our fault they're there. They're just doing what they do naturally. The only unnatural thing there is humans. So that's kind of what I wanted to re-impress on. We do understand the detriments that are results from these species, but they're our responsibility. And we need to remember that throughout all processes of their management. Don't make nature the villain when it would be functioning completely normally without us. We've thrown off the balance, so if we're to fix it, we need to remember that we're the reason it needs fixing in the first place, which is something to think about. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, it's just something to keep in mind, yeah. Because, I mean, it's easy for us to be like, oh, these frickin' things that are destroying my habitat and ecosystem. And, yeah, I mean, being a little angry is fair. I mean, of course, you're always like tripping through Phragmites and you're mad and it's frustrating.
I have a genuine hatred for managing Phragmites and things like that. The work is awful, but it's not an inherent hatred for the plant. It's a really giant, tall, successful grass that grows in places that other grasses don't. If it was confined to where it was, supposed to be, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
But we introduced it, intentionally. So that's something we have to. That's definitely something we have to deal with. And with that, think another episode is in the archives. We'll see you next time, and I certainly hope that you check out the rest of our content if this is the first time listening to our podcast, or check out our personal Instagrams or anything like that if you're still looking for more content from us that's not necessarily directly related to this podcast. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay smart.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Anthropocene.
Be sure to follow us on all social media and feel free to reach out to us with any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future episodes or species you'd like to see us cover.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end of the episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you head to the show notes, check out the links of things I might have mentioned in the show, go follow us on social media, and yes, do @ me. I'd love to hear from you, what you think, if you want to be a guest with me, if you have suggestions for future episodes, that would be great. Other than that, we do have a Patreon link as well below if you're feeling like helping support the show, and I can't wait to see you around for next episode. Thanks, bye.